There you all are. Good afternoon and welcome to the Risk Crew Achieving Cyber Essentials Plus little soiree we have for you this afternoon. I'm Nick Roberts with Risk Crew. You're very welcome, and I trust you are all in good mood, given Boris has announced that restaurants and bars will officially be open on the 4th of July. So that's good news. So thanks for joining this afternoon. I guess for those of you whose organisations are either Cyber Essentials Regular and aspiring to upgrade to Cyber Essentials Plus, or if you're going straight for Cyber Essentials Plus, hopefully this session will give you some very good insight and information and tips about how to achieve Cyber Essentials Plus. We want to make this as interactive as possible, so please, if you have any questions, just type them in and we'll either get to them at the end or I'll try and weave them in at an appropriate moment. I can see from the attendees list a few familiar faces, so good to see you, but quite a few new people. So those of you who aren't familiar with Risk Crew, we are a London-based information security consultancy practice. We've got two core services, governance, risk, compliance consultancy, and we also have a very talented team of penetration testers. But above all, we're really passionate about helping our clients uplift their information security posture. So we were very keen to be involved with the Cyber Essentials scheme when it launched, and we were a certification body for Cyber Essentials right from launch in June 2014. So that's who Risk Crew are. There's two of us presenting this afternoon, myself, Nick Roberts. I have been with Risk Crew for 5 years and in information security for 15 years. My role here is sort of pre-sales advisory. I also do a lot of account and project management, so I'm sort of in the sort of advisor role here at Risk Crew. My colleague Taras, who will be joining shortly, well, if I'm an advisor, Taras is very much a doer. Taras has been with us just under 3 years. He's one of our risk consultants. He's also our principal Cyber Essentials assessor. So he's going to get deep into some technical advice on Cyber Essentials as we go through this session. So this is the Nick and Taras show. If you can try and contain your excitement, this is what we're going to be looking at for the next 35 minutes or so. I'm going to give you a bit of an overview on what has changed with Cyber Essentials in the scheme this year. We'll have a quick look at the relationship between Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus. Then I'll hand over to Taras, who's going to give you lots of guidance and advice on getting certified to CE+, the timelines that you can expect, and most importantly, what to expect from the assessment. And we'll have some time at the end for some Q&A, so keep your questions coming in, and we'll have plenty of time at the end, myself and Taras, to answer any questions. Sounds like fun, huh? So let's firstly look at what has changed with Cyber Essentials this year. Well, not a lot has changed with the actual requirements. The questionnaire has remained largely the same. It's the sort of management of the standard. So just to give you a potted history, the standard is owned by the government's National Cyber Security Centre. Previously, there were 5 accreditation bodies. Now, that was a bit of a problem because they all had a slightly different interpretation of the requirements of the standard. But that changed in April this year when a single accreditation body, IASME, was awarded the contract for 5 years. So it's now a single accreditation body looking after the administration of the Cyber Essentials scheme. So it means there's a consistent and common interpretation. So the changes within the administration are everyone applying and all of the certification bodies use IASME's Pervade portal. So it's the IASME portal, and each certification body, such as Risk Crew, has a sub portal within the master portal, which is where you guys have to go on and complete the Cyber Essentials questionnaire. One of the changes is that if you want to go straight to CE+, you can no longer do that. You have to achieve Cyber Essentials regular certification first, and then you have 3 months to upgrade to Cyber Essentials Plus. That was again one of the inconsistencies with the different accreditation bodies. And if your assessor has to issue a fail at your CE Plus assessment, you have 30 days to remediate the fail. So these are a few new rules that have come in with the new administration of the standard. I hope that's clear. So let's now look at quick look at the relationship between CE regular and CE Plus. So as you're all hopefully aware, the whole Cyber Essentials scheme was to help, was designed to help small and medium organisations improve their security posture. Those companies that may not have internal security expertise. The CE scheme, it's about 45 requirements or questions spread over 5 information security disciplines. Now, Cyber Essentials is self-assessment. So you go onto the portal, you complete the questionnaire, you submit it, and then an assessor will review it, and it's reviewing whether your answers are compliant with the requirements of the standard. If they are, you're issued CE certification. The difference is with Plus, you have to prove it. You have to walk the walk with Cyber Essentials Plus. And this is where the scheme has tightened up a bit under the new 2020 rules. So we have to, a certification body has to actually review your Cyber Essentials questionnaire responses and see evidence.
Sorry to interrupt, Nick. Taras here. I think your screen has frozen.
Have I frozen again? Sorry, let me just do a reboot. There we go. That should be okay. Thanks, Taras. Yeah, so the difference is we will conduct an audit of your questionnaire responses. We need to see evidence. It may be a policy, it may be a setting, it may be a software version, but we need to see evidence of how you're complying with the requirement. The assessor will also conduct internal and external vulnerability scans, review your malware protection. Taras is going to get into this in a lot more detail in his section, and we'll look at mobile devices that are connected to your network or to your email. So Plus is quite a bit further on than regular Cyber Essentials, because you actually have to prove how you're complying and if you meet the requirements. And it's obviously an independent assessment done by an approved certification body. We've not got any questions yet. Okay, so let's move on to the. So at this point, we've heard from Taras. Can we see you visually, Taras? Are you there?
I am.
There he is.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Taras. Good afternoon. Taras, sorry, you've had your hair cut. I haven't seen Taras last week. It's the first time.
I also got a clean shirt on, and I took a shower for the first time today. And there are no children in the room, so this is a safe and fairly professional home working environment. But I'm disappointed by your shirt today, Nick. It's usually.
I thought I'd take it down to my normal vulgar floral shirts. Yes. Sorry, guys. Taras, over to you. Let me just remind you, if you have any questions as Taras goes through, I'll be monitoring them, and I'll weave them in where possible. Taras, I'll go your way.
Thank you. Let me just bring up the slides. There we go. So yes, hi and welcome everyone. As Nick mentioned, I'm one of the CE assessors, so I'll take you through a few tips for achieving the CE Plus. Then we'll have a look at a typical timeline just to give you an idea of what to expect, and hopefully at the end we'll have some time for questions. So let's get straight to it. tip number one, or point number one, is start with the scope. When you approach CE, think what you want included, because whatever you decide on, first, obviously, you have to, as Nick mentioned, go to CE. Whatever you decide on, you have to stick with it and carry on until CE+. If you go for the whole organization, that's the best industry advice. That's also the NCSC's advice. That's great. Very few questions there. However, just to give you an idea of everything that's included, your whole organization, apart from your internal network and all your devices, your laptops and desktops and servers, will also now include any home working devices, any devices that belong to your staff that they use to access business information. Because the bottom line, when the whole organization is scope, is any device that's connected to the internet and is used to access business information will be presumed to be in scope. So even things like infrastructure as a service, so your VPN server or your web server, if you're the one controlling it, would also be in scope. If you do want to take anything out, then it must be protected by a firewall from the rest of the network. So it's very simple, but be aware that your network has to be segmented if you want to take something out. One thing to point is that software as a service, so all your cloud solutions that you just signed up to, as well as custom built applications, are out of scope. So the most an assessor would look at is how devices that you use to access those services, how they are configured, rather than looking at services and their configuration on their own.
Sorry, okay. Terence, I'm back already with a question, which sure. I think is quite a common one. Yeah. Someone's asking, what are the implications if they're using Office 365? What's in scope? What's out of scope with Office 365?
Yeah, obviously very common now. A lot of offices depend on it. So what would be in scope? Any device that you use to access it, we would check for whether it's up to date, whether it has up-to-date operating system on it, whether it's got password protection. The service itself and how it's configured and how it's managed is out of scope. Even the passwords that you use on your Office 365, the assessor is left sort of at the mercy of the software as a service requirement. Whatever their requirement is, that's a pass, and we don't touch it any further. But any device that you use to access it will be looked in, because it has to comply with the requirements of the standard. Hope that answers it.
Got it, thanks.
Okay. No problem. Right. Tip number 2 is and Nick or anyone else will tell you in pre-sales or any company you engage is really should recommend this. Preparation is key. So before any submission, any official submission of questionnaire, be sure to have a dress rehearsal. So what that means is whether you've recently submitted and completed and passed the CE, or whether you're starting everything from the beginning, you're going for CE and straight for CE+. Just before the CE+, before the actual assessment, review CE questionnaire answers to ensure that they're still relevant, they still meet compliance, that for every section where you might need to demonstrate evidence, that you can provide that evidence. For example, if you're doing your CE+ assessment a bit later with a slight delay, more than 2 weeks especially is relevant. Think, have you had any infrastructure changes within a company? This has been especially relevant now in the pandemic, where a lot of companies have moved their staff to working from home or furloughed their staff. they had to set up VPN servers. That all becomes relevant. So if there have been any changes, make sure you note them, speak to your assessor about them, and they will be the best person to advise on how to address it even at this stage. The same with policy. If you've had any policy changes since you've submitted the CE or you began the process, address them, speak about them with your assessor, just to make sure it does not become a problem down the line. Come into the actual assessment prepared and knowing what to expect.
Sorry, Taras, another question. Question from me actually.
Okay,
so
go ahead.
As an assessor, you'll be reviewing policies. That's a big part of the assessment. Do you have to have policies in any particular format or hierarchy? What's the expectation with policy documentation? And can screen grabs of policies be used for a CE Plus assessment?
Good question. We related to that. We often have clients come across clients who've achieved ISO 27001 certification, and they say, does that guarantee that I will pass CE Plus assessment, for example? The good news is there are no strict requirements on policy for some sections of the standards. So, for example, how you manage your administrative access rights, you have to provide evidence that the policy is documented. How it's documented, what sort of policy, whether it's all in one usage policy, IT policy, or just sit somewhere as a reference document on your internal network, or even if you conduct trainings regularly and it's clearly stated there, that's enough. That counts as documented policy, even if it's within some software solution. So there is no strict requirement there. Sorry, Nick, what was the second part of your question?
Can a client submit screen grabs of policies?
Right.
Because I know that we now conduct remote assessments. You're going to come onto that, sure. But can we submit screen grabs of policies?
Yeah, especially relevant now, and it used to be the case with some accrediting bodies that would pass. You know, clients would email screen grabs of their policies or their configuration, and that does it. Unfortunately, that's no longer the case. Whether you're doing the assessment remotely or on site, the assessor needs to see it live. So even if you're on the video call, you know, your Teams or whatever, Zoom, the assessor will need to see it live. They might choose to then take a screenshot, but it has to be live, and they have to see that it's there, that you haven't just you know, got some document, passed it off as your own. So that's one of the sort of changes in the standard requirements and how strict it is.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. On to the next one. Yes, this applies really from the beginning to the end, and any assessor will stress this, or should stress it, is at every stage consult your assessor. The assessor is there to help you, to guide you. They are interested in you passing the assessment, because you know, hopefully this is something you will do yearly. So everyone's interest should be to help you to pass this. So what does that mean in practice? As soon as you've done your questionnaire review, your dress rehearsal, so to speak, send the updated questionnaire to your assessor for your review, especially if you haven't done the CE submission yet. That's doubly important, because Nick might have mentioned that once you submit the CE questionnaire, even if you're going just for CE, and if an assessor does find more than 2 major non-compliances or something that leads to an automatic failure, you only have 2 days to remediate and to change your answer. So to make sure you don't put pressure on yourself, and to make sure you know at this stage, before anything becomes official, what changes you might need to do, send your updated questionnaire to the assessor. As part of that, confirm the scope with the assessor. And here we're getting into sort of more specific things like the number of external IPs. Your assessor might query you in case they don't see, if you mention on the questionnaire that you use VPN, they will ask, do you own the VPN server? Do you manage it yourself? If so, why isn't it part of the scope? So things like that. The number of locations, number and types of internal devices, so that the assessor can have an idea how many they will then check during the sample assessment of the internal network. And this is your opportunity, again, before any report gets submitted, is to seek advice. If something does come up, seek advice on remedial actions. This is still the time to do it, because no clock is ticking apart from the 3 months from the CE. So at this stage, really, anywhere, if you've got doubts about any systems, any software, any configuration, this is the time to speak to your assessor. And finally, if you're ready to go, then this is the time to discuss the logistics, your dates, whether the assessment will be on-site or remote, connectivity requirements for the assessor, what your preferences are, what your restrictions are, how easy it is, I don't know, to whitelist or provide VPN access, that sort of thing. So we cannot stress it enough. Speak to your assessor really from beginning to end of the C+ project, but especially at this stage before the assessment. Go really into the details of what is expected of you.
So
yes.
We touched on it earlier, talking about we've now, with the pandemic, we've now had it's now acceptable to conduct these assessments remotely, and that will apply indefinitely. Yes. So in your experience as an assessor, you've done it both ways, on site and remotely a lot recently. What are the pros and cons from the client perspective, on site versus remote? Well,
not to take anything away from remote assessments, they're still good, but obviously if you're on site, the assessor with all his knowledge and experience is available to you. So the whole process is usually much more efficient, and much more knowledge gets, I guess, transferred to the client, especially if the assessor does find some non-compliances or scans throw up a failure. Then right there on the spot, the assessor will be able to recommend the best way, the most efficient way, knowing your restrictions, knowing your, I don't know, staff and resource constraints, to recommend the best way to remediate. They can sometimes even be there, sort of present while you do the remediation, and confirm that it has worked on the spot. Unfortunately, with IASME standard now, if it's a failure during the first try, we still have to log it. But at least after speaking to the assessor, if they are on site and you know that they've already approved of remedial actions that you've done, they will leave and you'll be safe in the knowledge that it's just a matter of resubmitting the report and you'll essentially pass. Remote assessments are still fine. I mean, Teams, Zoom, WebEx, they are great. It's just not as personal. There's always a time limit versus if a person goes on site for a day or half a day, they can't log off or leave easily. So don't be afraid of the remote assessments. Assessors now, well, in the last three months, they've had a lot of support, a lot of advice from IASME and NCSC to prepare the clients and to make it as painless and as easy as possible for the client. So both are fine, but I would always prefer the on-site assessment.
And I guess it's important to say that a good assessor is on your side as the client. They're not there to find non-conformities. They're not there to fail you. It's the opposite. It's to find compliance, and where there isn't, to help you uplift security in order to comply.
I really hope so. Although, you know, we've come across, and there are sort of message boards and internal ASME discussions, you do come across people who take it very seriously, and it's more like an exam rather than, you know, a journey that they think of as take it on together and helping you. But at the end of the day, assessors should be there to help you improve your security and do it in the most efficient way, a more suitable way for you while meeting the standard requirements. So absolutely, that should be the attitude of any assessor you come across.
Great.
Right. Let me see any questions. No, we're good. Point 4, sort of common sense, but all the previous 3 points have been leading up to it, but be prepared to prove that you are compliant on the day. The most common area where clients sort of fail or are surprised are updates, patching. So once the logistics is sorted out, you know the date of the assessment. Think, is there anything out of date? Are there any updates that are more than 14 days, critical security updates that are more than 14 days overdue? Has Apple released a new OS or iOS, you know, 2 or 3 weeks ago? Has Microsoft discontinued an operating system? So that is something, simply by looking at the calendar, sometimes it can throw up unexpected roadblocks to achieving your CE+. So once you know the dates, make sure that on the date everything will be up to date and will pass the requirement. Similar things with your policies, and on the day, make sure that whoever's in the office, whoever's is in scope, whatever devices are in scope and will be discovered on the network, that they meet the requirements. So a common, especially for smaller organizations, a common point of failure is personal identification numbers on mobiles. They come under the same requirements as passwords, so they have to be at least 8 characters long, which is not often. Touch ID and Face ID, unfortunately, does not, or fortunately, depending on your point of view, does not meet the requirements. So you still have to have those in place. I've already mentioned operating systems, very important, because operating system is not just a major non-compliance, it's an automatic failure. So it will set you back, and you'll have to start from scratch. Be sure to prepare for any sort of connectivity issues on the day, to make sure the assessor has got the right access to the right systems, the right devices on the day. It has to, again, correspond with the scope that was in the questionnaire, so make sure everything's online and the assessor has basically admin level access to those. Also, especially in the big organizations, beware of any unauthorized devices. You know, some people have guest networks, some people don't, they're not segmented, or if it's a temporary worker, or if a contractor that's come in and it hasn't been mentioned, or their particular device hasn't been mentioned on the questionnaire, and then during the on-site assessment or internal network assessment, if your assessor discovers an unknown device, that might lead to, depending on their sort of attitude and your explanation, to an automatic failure, because that means you've misrepresented the scope.
Sorry, just while you were talking about that, Taras, interesting question in from one of the audience. What percentage of assessments that you've experienced personally have concluded in a fail being issued?
Well, and I don't know whether that's good or bad, but from our experience at Risk School, on the first attempt of the assessments, it's usually 50-50. So 50% of our clients fail the assessment on the first attempt, which isn't, if you look sort of further down the line, the big picture hasn't been a problem, because we haven't had a single client that hasn't been able to pass it at the end. So we as soon as it's a failure, obviously your assessor should kick into action, help you given your circumstances, provide the best advice, make sure you're able to remediate it. If it's something as sort of common as an obsolete system or piece of software deep in your network that is very difficult to change, that is something that should have been caught at the beginning. This is where speaking to your assessor is very important, just so that these things can be addressed before the actual assessment, because once you conduct the assessment, if it's a fail, you only have 30 days. And especially if you're a big multinational organization, these change requests sometimes take a long time. So best to be prepared and try and figure the things out before the actual assessment.
Okay, that's interesting. Thanks.
No problem. And our final point it touches on what you said, I guess, Nick, is be prepared for the unexpected. So, like I said, 50% of our clients, slightly less, usually do fail on first attempt. But what gets them over the line at the end is, and we stress it at the beginning, is that the client should make sure that the management is bought in from the beginning. So if you're going for CE+, make sure you're prepared, your management is prepared, that if you do need to spend your resources and time and other people's time, especially if it involves multiple locations in multiple countries, that everyone's aware that this is underway and that changes might be necessary. So even if you're fairly confident, just be prepared that some remedial actions might be needed and that you only have 30 days to do it. As you might have guessed, there are sort of two ways to address any non-compliances and failures. One is sort of on the technical and control side, so upgrade your systems, patch your systems, install additional devices or get rid of some devices. Another side is policy. Just update and improve your policy to make sure that the risks that might be present are addressed on policy level and users are aware of the policy. That goes a long way to remediate any major non-compliances. And again, make the most of your time with the assessor. If it's a remote assessment and you receive the results, and you fail, your first instinct should be speak to the assessor. Let them guide you. If maybe they just fail to understand the context, because interesting thing, it's a clarification actually from in the current standard, is that even if you're during the vulnerability scanning, either internal or external, even if it's a high or a critical, but the complexity of the attack is actually high, then there's a case to be made, and IASME usually accepted, is that even this vulnerability can be marked as a pass, because IASME is sort of the basic standard. Any very complex attacks are not taken into account. So always speak to your assessor, even if it is a fail. They might be able to change the result, or at the very least, they are the best person to provide recommendation on how to achieve pass on resubmission.
Got a question, Taras,
Yes.
from the audience, relevant to this section. Hi there, does the 30 days to remediate a fail have to fall within the 3 months to get CE+? So if you had your assessment on day 90 and you issued with a fail, does that start the clock running on the 30 days? Or
Yeah, fair question, Neil. Yes, it all has to be done within 3 months. So realistically, if you've done your CE and you think, well, I've got 3 months to start my CE+, no, really, if you to bank sometimes and to ensure you have enough time to remediate, you only have 2 months to start it. Then you factor in the sort of logistics and the availability of the assessor. We'll have a look at the timeline next. That will give you a good idea of what to expect, so that you don't rush yourself and the assessor and their company.
Great. Hopefully that answers your question. Thank you.
Okay, now the typical timeline. In our experience, you should expect around 6 to 7 weeks for the whole process to complete. And here we're talking about from going for CE until obtaining your CE Plus certificate. So, for example, the first 2 weeks should be spent, identifying the scope, making sure on your side that your management is bought in and is prepared in case some changes are needed. Also, your team on your side is prepared. Sometimes, well, not sometimes, a lot of the times, a lot of our clients have third-party IT management companies and teams. They will need to be in the loop. It has to be in their calendar. Everyone has to be, the assessor and the IT team need to be in touch and on the same page. So the preparation is key. Talking to your assessor at this stage is key, and making sure your management is brought in is also very important. That should make at least week 3 and CE a breeze. The assessor has reviewed the questionnaire, everything's ready for submission. You're not foreseeing any problems down the line when it comes to actual assessment and audit. So by week 3, you should have the CE certificate. Week 4, again, if you've prepared enough in your first 2-3 weeks, then you should already have sort of dates in mind for the assessments, for the policy and process review, for the review of security controls and malware checks, internal and external vulnerability scanning. It takes a bit of planning, especially now with a lot of people working from home. So again, this is something that should be discussed in the sort of first 3 weeks, just so that everyone's aware of the timeline. Because remember, any assessor has to have official consent from your side that they're allowed to scan your systems, for example, because they obviously might come across sensitive information, as well, that the network restrictions, so any firewall policy, restrictive file policy has been lifted, whitelisting is in place, that sort of thing. Then if you're ready, week 4, it shouldn't take you more than a week to complete all the assessments. It's good then to leave a couple of weeks for any remediation, or to give a chance even to assessor to sort of compile the report and submit it. But again, if it's all done efficiently, it shouldn't take more than a couple of weeks to remediate, because we again run the risk of this overrunning for over the 3 months period, 3 months time slot. And after you've done remediation, or in case it wasn't necessary, the assessor will submit the report via Pervade portal. Pervade. So just how you submit the questionnaire, they will submit their assessment report online as well. IASME will review it, and then hopefully within a week, so we're talking about week 7, you should have your certificate, which will be valid for 1 year, and then hopefully in 1 year it starts all over again. So yeah, that's.
Sorry, I think it's important to say that this is a suggested timeline. Doing it over 6 or 7 weeks is long enough that it doesn't give you a nosebleed doing it, but also it's quick enough that it keeps the momentum going. But as a certification body, we can work with you as quickly or slowly as you need, as long as it hits that 3 month timeline.
Yes, for sure. I mean, we've done the whole process in as quickly as 2 weeks, and
Yeah.
we've had instances where it's taken us more than 3 months, and we had to apply for extension. So ASME, obviously, I had to provide sort of context and explanation on why. So, by the way, that is an option. It's not something that's advertised, but if it's an emergency, especially lately, there is a chance to apply for an extension. Obviously, nothing too long. We're talking about a couple of weeks, so it really depends on the assessor. So again, speak to your assessor. I can see a question here. I think anything else about the timeline? Did we have any more questions about the tips on the timeline?
No, I don't think so. There was that question about the 3 months and 30 days, but that's it on that.
Okay, I think I can see a question in the chat from Angela about mobile devices. It's unclear when the requirement says accessing corporate resources and excludes cloud-based resources. Where does Gmail and Google Calendar come into it? Can mobile devices be taken out of scope? Right. Excellent question. And it used to be much easier. You actually had, with some accrediting bodies, you had a little box to tick whether mobile devices are in scope or out of scope, and it was sort of up to you. Not anymore. Any device that accesses business information will be presumed in scope unless separated by a firewall or maybe a mobile management solution software. So in this case, if people, either it's their corporate devices or their private mobile devices, they access Gmail and Google Calendar. Remember, software as a service, so Gmail and Google are not in scope themselves. But what the assessor will have to check is that first, is the device still supported by manufacturer? So, for your Apple, it has to be, it cannot be anything older than iPhone 6 Plus. For your Android, obviously myriad of manufacturers, but your Android version cannot be older than Android 8. So the assessor will have to look whether mobile devices are still supported by the manufacturer, whether they receive configured so as to receive the latest security updates available from the manufacturer. For Android devices, for example, whether they're rooted, whether side loading is available, whether enabled, whether developer mode is enabled or disabled. For iOS devices, they will check really whether the device is jailbroken or not. The cases usually it's not. And for any device, they will check what are the password protections. So again, at the very minimum, it has to be 8 characters. So that's the checks they will have to perform on mobile devices. But the assessor won't go any further than that if all you use and all you access are software as a service, applications like Gmail and Google Calendar.
So the short answer to your question, Angelo, is no, they can't be taken out of scope.
Yes. Sorry. Yes. Correct.
One more question, Taras. Again, in your experience as an assessor, what are the common areas of failure for large companies and for small companies?
Yes, yes, there are some sort of common issues. So for large companies, it's usually some obsolete hardware or software, or some legacy, software that's connected to 10 other services and cannot be taken offline. And that sometimes is very problematic. That's where companies, have to take the whole 30 days. Sometimes they have to work on segmenting their network to take it out of scope. But usually, because whoever is going for CE+, especially on the client side, they're usually security minded. So they use actually Cyber Essentials Plus, and that's always been our recommendation in every assessor's. Use it as to get the change you've always wanted. If you're part of information security team within a company and you're companies fail in CE+ because some devices or some software is obsolete, no longer supported. Use the standard to get the change. It very often works. This again goes back to the insurance management board buy-in. If they've already signed up for it, then they'll be sort of forced to spend the money and spend the time to implement the changes. On the smaller side, we usually talking about sort of problems with home workers or people's personal devices. So it might come as a surprise that if your company and you have a lot of home workers and you don't employ VPN, so they all access either network or shared resources sort of straight to the router and using their own home broadband, that makes their home router in scope. So because that's their perimeter device. So that will, first of all, you have to list it in your questionnaire. Secondly, all the password requirements, firmware requirements kick in. Who manages those? You have to have it documented, and then we would have to scan it, obviously the external facing side of it. So those are sort of the two most common areas where different sized companies find problems.
Great, thank you. Well, that is about it on questions. So, but obviously you're very, very welcome to contact us directly. So just to sum up, Taras, what you're saying is choose a friendly certification body and assessor, pick your assessor's brains, get management support, do a dress rehearsal to make sure that you're ready, talk to your certification body about connectivity, and just be prepared. And this shouldn't be too onerous of a task, and so much so that in our experience we haven't had a fail. So great, thank you, Taras. That was very, very detailed and very useful.
Thank you.
That's about it, guys. Thank you so much for attending. I really hope that was useful for us. As I say, we're going to send you this slide deck. Myself and Taras, our contact details are there. This number on the screen gets you through to our office here. Yeah, we'd be very happy to answer any questions you have offline. If I could please ask you just to hang around for literally 60 seconds and 5 clicks of a mouse after this shuts down. There's a quick 5-question survey for your feedback of how you found this WebEx. So we'd really appreciate you participating in that. And yes, thank you very much, and enjoy dinner out on the 4th of July.
Thank you very much, everyone. Cheers,
Thanks, guys.
Nick.
Thank you.
Cheers.